Trimmed all the bungs in my gunnel slash rub rail slash shear line. And I've finished off sanding this with 120 now, palm sander and by hand. So the bungs are nice and flush, and it's smooth enough to start some varnish buildup once I finish off the ends, which as of this exact moment I've not yet decided. But anyway, I've both sides 120 grit, which is generally as far as I take wood that's going to be clear finished on the exterior. At the after termination of these gunnels, my thinking is I'm going to wrap it around, create a little return, and that'll dead end right here. At least one. I don't know if it needs to be the full thickness. Okay, well, we'll see. Here's where these little returns ended up. They're just epoxied in place. They're being clamped. They've got an angle on the top as needed to make it basically flat. This one's a little high here. I'll just sand that down later. I left them a little long for final trimming at this edge. But they meet in with the existing gunnel pretty well at the corner. It's the starboard side. And probably I'll end up with some sort of a taffrail piece here and a breast hook up forward just for appearance. None of this is necessary. We'll just see how this all goes as I get into finishing stages. But I think that return's going to look pretty good. I think I'm just going to do the one layer here, and I'll shape this into some kind of a corner that'll look good. Not too much of a radius because I want a metal rub rail on the outside, but that'll work itself out when I get there. This is a very basic template out of cardboard for the outboard well cover. This piece of cardboard is just a little smaller than the space, and I've used some steel rules to trace the outline. I used a 2-inch ruler along the forward and after edges. 1.5 inch wide steel rule for the sides because my longer one is too long. And then a 1-inch ruler around these posts. So this gives me the basic framework of a pattern to use on my plywood. So with the pattern on top of the workpiece, I used the same rulers to trace the lines back out. Just hold the ruler against the line and trace the outer edge of the ruler in each case. And that recreates the shape of the panel that I need. Now I can cut this out. This is the outboard well platform of lore and legend. Finally cut and fit into the boat. And it's got a 10-degree angle on both end cuts. And that's because of the angle in which it goes into the boat. And this is ostensibly this piece here that I was supposed to get out of a offcut from the last bottom panel. But I went a different route there, so that's why I spliced it together. I cut it just undersized so that it's something I can get in and out without it swelling and sticking or whatever is going to happen. So there's a little gap. It's okay, this will get an external bead of sealant to give it a generally watertight function, but it needs to be able to come out so I can get access in there if ever needed. So it's not perfectly fit, and that's intentional. So this is ready to go. Epoxy coat, primer, whatever I'm going to do next. But this helps finish off that space quite nicely. There will be 2 scuppers installed in the transom at the height of the lower part of this. So this part of the boat will be self-bailing. So any splash over from the outboard well, from the transom itself, will drain back out. And this helps make the cockpit basically safe from any overflow from the transom. Plan to install a couple good handles up on the forward end so that I can have something to pull on and get this thing out of here if needed. I'll epoxy coat the bottom as is. This exposed side here, I need to fill that seam flush just for cosmetic purposes. And then this will get epoxied and maybe a piece of 6-ounce cloth on the top. Yeah, I might do that. That'll give it some good wear resistance, because this will probably end up being a place for a fuel tank, portable fuel tank. That's all this boat's going to have, nothing built in. This is the first coat of fairing filler on this seam on my outboard well. And I also reamed out and filled a few screw holes that were left over from the jig or whatever. Let that cure, and it'll probably take one more coat. So here's the bottom of the anchor well. That screw is there so I can pull it out. And this is ready to install whenever I am. I've marked 2 drain holes on the side, one on each side. A little black mark is the center for an 1.25 inch hole, which will fit one of those little brass rubber stopper sleeves that you've probably seen. And to mark that hole, I laid the 1.25 inch bit hole saw right on the platform and parallel with the aft bulkhead here. And I loosened the arbor and used a hammer to tap the point of the drill bit into the wood. That gave me that center mark. So now I can drill this from the inside out with a small bit, and that way I know where to drill from the outside. So I want these holes to be right flush with the platform here so that this will drain completely. So that's the next task. Well, that's not going to work. Well, they're just a touch higher than I wanted, but that'll do. That one's pretty good. Guess I had the angle just slightly off on that one, but that'll work. I might prop the platform up a little bit at the aft end so that it's totally flush there, or at least dry fit, so I know how it's going to lay. But anyway, that's pretty good. So that's the work on that for now. I'm not going to final install it until I've finished out the compartment beneath it. I epoxy coated the open space that will be beneath the anchor well, beneath those cleats. Did it all from the top. I didn't film it because there's not really enough room for a camera to see past if I'm in there working. But I used a long pole on a roller and a brush and got in there. I could have gotten most of it through that round hole in the bulkhead, but that seemed like it'd be really messy, so this was my choice. And this will be the final finish in there. It's a heavy coat of epoxy. This is not a visible space, but so I wanted to epoxy coat that so that I can get this anchor well cover installed. I also epoxy coated the bottom of that piece of plywood. This is the After a quick sanding, this is the second coat of fairing filler on this seam on my outboard well and a few screw holes. And that's, from the looks of it, that's going to complete the work on that. Inside, I finished up a little sanding on these dog paw steps. And a few odds and ends, epoxy filled screw holes in various places all needed a quick sand. I installed this anchor well bottom in a thick bed of epoxy especially at the aft end, because back there I wanted to hold it up so that it's exactly flush with the bottom of that drain hole, or both drain holes. So I put some heavy dabs of epoxy so that I could sort of customize the height. And then later, once this is cured, I'll come back and fill it all the edges and finalize this installation. You can see it's just exactly flush, even a touch higher, which is even better. So I can shape that as necessary to get the little brass insert in there later. But we want this to drain right out naturally on both sides and not pool. So that was my goal with how I installed this for now. I reamed out and filled all the holes in the hull where the screws from the gunnels had poked through when installing the first layer of the gunnel. Reamed out with a countersink, and now one coat of fairing filler in them. They'll need one more to make them nice. So to support the transom for mounting the outboard, this design calls for a 2x8 run across the top of the transom opening, full width, more or less. So that's my next task. That's the outboard reinforcement marked 23 on the transom there. Doesn't really show it other than that, but it's pretty straightforward. This boat will have a 30 horsepower outboard on it, so this brace will give it the appropriate thickness and some extra strength. So there's my 2x8 transom brace. It's flush with the top of the well, and I've shaped it just slightly shorter than the actual width, just because I thought it would look better to offset it a little. And I put a 10-degree angle on it for looks also. Covers about half the transom, height-wise that is. And here's the other side. And I'm going to install this with a heavy bed of epoxy and lots of clamps. Got these big wooden jaw clamps so that I can reach down and clamp it at the bottom. So I will remove this temporary installation and get some epoxy going. This adhesive mix has 404 high density filler for strength and Cabosil for thickness. This is 8 ounces of epoxy mixed with those two fillers till it's the consistency I want. Here's the outboard bracket installed with a zillion clamps. Lots of epoxy squeeze out everywhere. Made sure I got it all the way around. Big jaw clamps are very handy for getting down towards the bottom, where I also have squeeze out consistently along the length. What I was looking for, I put adhesive on both sides, on the board and on the hull itself, just to make sure there was plenty, because the 2x8 had some inconsistencies. The hull is basically flat, well secured, and now I can go ahead and clean up as much of this excess as I can. I've got it, all the clamps all in it and everything, but that's okay. I'll just get whatever I can, clean up the rest later. So this is now glued in, cleaned up, gone around and cleaned up all that squeeze out best I can. A little bit left around the clamps poses no problem later. I just didn't want huge gobs in places that would be difficult to clean up. I was going to do some fillets with the excess, but it wasn't really a filleting mix. It was a little loose, so I just cleaned it up flush for now, and later I will fillet around these two top corners and the sides and underneath, just for looks. Here's the underside. It's well adhered in the epoxy. I used a lot of epoxy. I've got a lot of clamps. There was no problem with getting the bottom to squeeze in and push out the excess epoxy. So I know it's well epoxied everywhere. That's why I do it that way. If I don't throw away a lot of excess, then I'm not sure that I have a good bond in there. So I want to make sure I get lots to push out when I clamp things in place. So that can sit in the clamps for overnight or longer, until whenever I need to get in there and do some more. But we'll just let that sit for a while. This outboard bracket, stiffener, whatever, is well secured now. I've removed all the clamps. I've got some cleanup to do, particularly at the top edge here where there's epoxy that I couldn't clean up. The clamps were blocking it. And then around the upper edges and these end cuts, I've got a nice little fillet there. And then on the underside, where you can't really see, but I've got a very big fillet here, just so that has a nice, smooth, large transition out onto the hull. It'll make it easier for all the future steps I have to do, like painting. So that is structurally complete, just ready for some cleanup and eventual epoxy coating. So up here in the anchor well, I've installed a nice fillet all the way around the bottom. That not only helps secure this platform in place permanently, but also fills the little gap around the edge and gives a nice rounded transition to help keep it draining and cleaner. And at the two drain holes, I've carefully shaped it to lead right out the drain holes on both sides. And I also did a little fillet up the edges of the bulkhead here, bulkhead 2, which I did not do a fillet on when I installed it because it was challenging to get up in there and do it. But now I've just put that in mainly for cosmetics, and again to have a nice rounded corner and fill the little seam that's there, so that when we paint and all that, then it's all taken care of. And up here above my tabbing on the stem, I've just got a little fairing compound to smooth that out, because this will actually be visible when the boat is all complete. This is the starboard side drain hole from the anchor well. You can see how I've got it nicely shaped, and I'll fine tune that later as needed once this epoxy is cured and I can sand and see if it needs any more. This is the port side drain. So I'll show you more of this when it's all cured and sanded and done. Here at the transom, I finished off my little returns for the gunnel. It's one piece of mahogany that turns the corner. I didn't see any reason to do the 2 layers. This accomplishes what I wanted. And I've sanded it and rounded the edges, and this is basically complete. Here's a look at the port side, aft end of the gunnel. Same thing here. Up here at the bow end of the gunnel, I struck a 45-degree line from the outer face and sanded these back to that line, and also to a line that approximates that of the stem. So they're flush here where they meet the stem, and they angle back 45 degrees approximately, and that forward end also matches that of the stem. That's the finished product of the gunnel up at this end. Here at the transom is my new outboard motor mount / stiffener, whatever this is. This is epoxied in place, and now I've cleaned it up, sanded, filleted, and sanded these fillets all the way around. And I'm calling this complete until after primer anyway. And then I will dress up any of these fillets if they need it at that time, but this is enough. This is more than good enough for now. I've rounded everything, and it looks pretty good. So we're going to call that good until primer. I finished up fill work on the various little screw holes that penetrated the hull when I put the gunnels on. It's a line of little screw holes right through here. They're all filled flush now. 2 layers of epoxy fill are in them, and that'll just make it nice and clean and nice when I paint. These little efforts are not insignificant, but in the end, it's what you have to do. So here we are. This is the outboard well platform after the second and final coat of fairing filler over the seam. That is all set, ready for the next step. I believe I'm going to sheathe the top of this in 6-ounce cloth just for durability. And I will epoxy coat the bottom side, and that'll be the bottom side's final finish. Here in the anchor well, I gave these cured fillets just a light sanding, and this is pretty much it in here until I epoxy coat. This is a quote finished space, but is not highly visible. And any further work I do in here will only be after primer, if it highlights the need to clean up these fillets at all. I made good effort to keep these fillets nice and clean so that they didn't require any sanding or other cleanup, and I'm pretty pleased with where this ended up. My intent is to put some brass scupper sleeves into these openings, and for now I'm still planning on that, but there is the possibility that I leave it like this. This is all epoxy coated. It will be painted, assuming I leave it like this. This is where I sanded. There's a little bare spot in the plywood platform, so I'll get some more epoxy on that at some point. Well, this whole thing's going to be epoxy coated. The little brass sleeves are nice. If I have any inclination to put a rubber stopper in here ever, which might be nice to have the option, but otherwise I'm not sure they're required, so I'm thinking about it. This looks pretty clean and decent the way it is. And I don't know if I'll have trouble fitting one in there with the fillets. We'll see, but plans change. No final decisions on that yet, though.